Please welcome to the stage Executive Director of Breakthrough Energy, Rodi Guidero.
Top of the morning. Welcome. Welcome, welcome to the Breakthrough Energy Summit. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you all for being here. It is great, great, great to see so many familiar faces and a lot of new ones too. Thank you for being here. It's great to be here in the UK, isn't it? Huh? The birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. At Breakthrough Energy, we celebrate all of the progress that people have made because of the Industrial Revolution. Lifespan, education, our comfort, we're all way up. Poverty, child mortality, thankfully, are way down. But the fossil fuel energy that brought about the Industrial Revolution now puts people's progress at real risk. That's because we emit over 50 billion tons of greenhouse gases every year from 5 sectors that we call the grand challenges: manufacturing, electricity, agriculture, transportation, and buildings. The greenhouse gases from those 5 grand challenges make the world hotter and hotter. And the higher temperatures increase the likelihood and the severity of things that hurt people. Extreme heat waves, severe storms, floods, droughts, insect-borne diseases, wildfires, sea level rise, and many more. And the great tragedy is that people who get the least benefit from fossil fuels suffer the most. So we have to bring about a clean industrial revolution as quickly as possible. It's our responsibility, especially as our energy demands go up. So our collective mission is to reduce all of the 5 grand challenge emissions down to 0. As Bill says in his climate book, the way to do that has 3 parts. 1, roll out all of the clean solutions we have today as quickly and as smartly as possible. 2, we have to discover, develop, and deploy all the additional solutions we need to get to 0. And 3, we have to make the clean solutions just as cheap as fossil fuels. We've got to get rid of the green premium everywhere it exists, so everyone can choose the clean options. Pretty simple to say. We all know it is definitely not easy. Our collective mission is extraordinarily challenging. We are pushing. We are pushing for an unnaturally fast change to an energy system that's enormous. It's complex, extremely valuable. It's got a lot of inertia. It resists change. On top of that, we need global cooperation. So we know our collective mission is massive, it is daunting, but make no mistake, we can do it. We can do it. Yeah. We can do it by rallying the world to unleash the power of innovation. Innovation is what we stand for at Breakthrough Energy. Now, to be clear, I'm not just talking about new technology. I'm talking about all the new methods, all the new products, all the new services, all the new solutions. I'm talking about all the new things we need to create a global clean energy system. I'm talking about innovation that comes to life when technology, policy, and capital markets work in concert together. Innovation like that, whew, look out. Innovation like that gives us an incredible opportunity. The opportunity to create a world where everyone has the basic things we all take for granted. Clean water, food, shelter, electricity. This opportunity, the opportunity to continue the amazing story of human progress, it's in front of us right now. But it is hard. This may be the hardest thing people have ever had to do. And at times, that might seem overwhelming. I get it. So let's take a minute. Let's take a minute and reflect on how far we've already come. In 2015, world leaders got together in Paris and agreed to limit global emissions. That's when Bill got on the field in a big way, and he launched Breakthrough Energy, a global effort to unleash innovation on climate change because he knew we had no chance without it. Since that time, we've seen incredible progress. We've seen numerous technology solutions emerge, clean solutions that are ready to go to market in big ways across all of the 5 grand challenges. We've seen nations enact landmark policies that incentivize clean investment. And we've seen billions of dollars deployed by visionary sovereign wealth funds, endowments, and financial institutions that view climate tech as an important part of their portfolios. It's a lot of progress, folks. This amount of progress was truly unimaginable just 10 years ago. Truth be told, when we first started, we wondered if anyone would want to build climate companies that could make a big difference. I had my doubts, to be honest. Remember, Bill challenged us to start Breakthrough in the aftermath of the clean tech bust. This was a time when many entrepreneurs and most investors decided to pursue other, easier opportunities. So I wondered, would anyone really be up for this? Thank goodness the answer was yes. At first, it was just a small group that was undaunted by past failures. Courageous innovators who actually saw the clean tech setbacks as important lessons that increased our chances of future climate success. But what started small grew and grew. And it's now turned into a legion of people who fight every day to build the world we all want to live in. It's been amazing. It has been inspiring, personally inspiring to see our movement grow. In 2018, about 50 people got together for our first big Breakthrough Energy event. Take a look at those pictures. Now take a look around. Take in this picture. At this global summit, just 6 years later, our group is now almost 1,500. All right? And that includes, as you saw last night, incredible innovators that are leading companies. They're leading companies in cement, leading companies in steel, leading companies in storage, in critical minerals, in food, in buildings. They're leading companies in transmission. They are leading companies in all of the areas we need to drive global emissions down to zero. Our work at Breakthrough Energy is centered around helping the innovators succeed. We know our future depends on the innovators. They're the climate heroes. So everything we do, from pre-venture discovery to venture capital company building, to mobilizing partners, developing and protecting great policies, enabling first-of-a-kind projects that are so important to driving down the green premium, helping the world understand how much progress we are making with innovation. Everything we do is designed to help the innovators discover, develop, and deploy everything we need to bring about a clean industrial revolution. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'll take one there. Thank you. But thank you to the amazing partners that make up the Breakthrough Energy Network. None of this could have happened without you. Your partnership helped jumpstart a big innovation ecosystem. And that big ecosystem is now helping so many innovators make so much progress. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So we made a lot of progress. How do we keep up the momentum? How do we make our movement even bigger? Over the next 2 days, we're going to have a lot of fun urging you. We're going to have a lot of fun urging you to think about what you can do to push things forward faster. You'll hear about big challenges that you can help with. Things like building projects, modernizing the grid, ensuring that hard-won climate policies stay in place. You hear about clean solutions that are ready. They are ready for you to buy today. And you'll hear about new things, like super cheap hydrogen. Those things we're getting ready for you to buy tomorrow. You'll, of course, have lots of opportunities to learn and to reconnect. But the most important thing for you to do over the next 2 days is to spend time with the innovators. They're the ones leading the way. They're the ones that can tell us what's needed to go further and faster over the next 10 years that are so critical. So please, spend time with them. Take advantage of this rare opportunity where so many amazing innovators are gathered together in one place. Listen to them. Learn from them. Let them inspire you to do even more. One thing I already know is they need even more investors. They need even more customers. They need even more advocates. They need even more partners just like all of you. People that are just as courageous, just as optimistic, just as relentless as they are. So let's all keep drawing other people in. Together, we can transform trillion-dollar markets. Together, we can decarbonize the global economy. And together, we can bring about a clean industrial revolution. Let's get to it. Let's get to it. All right. It's now my privilege to welcome the person who launched us, inspired us, called us to this journey almost 10 years ago. He is among the most courageous, most optimistic, most relentless, most visionary, most generous innovators the world has ever seen. We are so lucky to have him. He has transformed so many lives, very specifically, including my own. Please welcome Breakthrough Energy's founder, Bill Gates.
Well, it's pretty phenomenal to be here. You know, you and I, on a day-to-day basis, it's okay, what about this policy? What about this company? And, you know, I've seen over time the team you've built, the leadership you've provided. But, you know, to see it all in one place, last night to go around and talk to those companies, it you know, brings it to life that we have come a long ways. And although we still have a long ways to go, it's great to reflect on the people who've helped us get here.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you so much. And thank you, Bill. Thank you for that opening. You know, this is really a fantastic opportunity. You and I kind of talked about this. It's really an opportunity for you to give this group of amazing partners sort of your view on the state of the transition. Let's start with, I guess, just set the stage, because not everybody knows all of the parts of Breakthrough Energy. You know, some know about ventures or fellows or, you know, policy or catalysts, and so they kind of see the organization through that lens. So why don't you start with just telling us why did you start Breakthrough Energy and what are the component parts?
Yeah, well, Breakthrough Energy, you know, sort of was created with this idea of doing whatever was necessary to get the technologies up to scale and make sure that being green wouldn't be more expensive. You know, the theory of change was that even if the rich countries were willing to pay green premiums, that 60% of emissions were in the middle income countries, and they wouldn't be subsidized because the numbers are just too big, and they wouldn't slow down because the need for basic shelter and services is so compelling. And so that there was only one way to square the circle, that even if the world should pay high green premiums, they weren't going to do it. And we didn't know, the innovation we could unleash. And I've been surprised. In fact, as I was walking around last night, I thought, when's the last time London saw this much innovation all in one place? And immodestly, I thought, well, probably you have to go back to 1851, when Prince Albert, brought together a bunch of technologies which were foundational for the Industrial Revolution. I think it's fair to say that what you were seeing, and we'll see as you talk to all those companies, is the foundation for this green industrial revolution. So in the core, we knew we needed high-risk money for the companies, but we also knew we needed to have there be companies. So, in the earliest stage, which we're calling discovery, we built the Fellows Program. And that's constantly evolving. It's a fantastic program. We'll announce a Fellows Program based in Singapore with a couple of incredible partners. So that's actually growing as we see any place that we still think there's possibility, and we'll go right down to the basic science. Development, that's the venture work. We've raised a number of funds. We've raised a number of new funds. We, super appreciate the people who've been involved in that. And then now, the deployment piece, which is where our catalyst work comes in, and that's the earliest thing. We're announcing a few really great new projects here, but helping the whole world think through, okay, what policies, what type of financing takes the uncertainty and gets that onto the learning curve. I'd say that's going to have to be a major focus for us. Our policy group has had great success. We're even more integrated now, where because we have the companies, we can say, okay, what policies are holding you back? What policies would let you move forward? And that's very much a global thing. A lot in the United States, but Europe and even more geographies. So as we mature, we're more global. So we're bringing all of these things in an integrated way, and building partnerships for every one of those things. So I'm thrilled at all the different pieces, even things like we'll talk today about this grid modeling project, where we think there has to be a framework for how that grid modeling works, including public domain, lots of standards, lots of commercial software that let people plan out what, as Eric will describe, is this incredibly difficult need to not only electrify things, but maintain low cost and reliability while we do it. So, breakthrough energy is kind of stunning in its scope. I've had a chance to build 3 organizations, Microsoft, Gates Foundation, and Breakthrough Energy. And each of them, I had to learn new things. I had to work to bring in best-in-class people. And Breakthrough Energy has been as fulfilling and as high quality as anything I've ever done.
Well, that's high praise, and we're grateful. We're grateful you've done it. It's been fun to be on the journey with you from the beginning. I mean, and I had a lens, as most people here know, that was really just focused on ventures. And then you really taught me, and I think we learned about all of these component parts that we have to bring together. And as Bill said, that's been a great evolution for us, is that how do you have these different areas of expertise really integrate and work together? The sum of the parts is greater, right? And so it's been an interesting thing, and we've come to it. You heard me just say it. Our work is centered around the innovators. It's not centered around ventures or policy or partnerships or what have you. It's really centered around the people that are leading the clean industrial revolution, and we are doing everything we can, every sector, every stage, every place, every tool, and we may come up with more. I mean, Bill just talked about the grid, and that's a brand new thing, right? His learning, right, said, there is a challenge here that we have to address, and no one else is doing it, and so we're going to step into it. So don't be surprised. As we grow, we continue, we're going to learn, and we'll adapt, and we'll address things that, we feel need addressing. So it's been fantastic. The thing that you've always said from the beginning, all right, is we gotta bring innovation to this space. And when you first said it to me, I kind of said, okay, yeah, I mean, I get it, but I was a survivor of the clean tech bust, and so that was a time that was daunting. It was challenging. I would say what we thought was kind of like a bit of a pipe dream in the beginning has really turned into this pipeline of innovation. And we've seen that in real form, real life. We could touch it, feel it. I said it last night, see it, hear it, smell it. It's been fantastic. Can you just reflect, though, specifically on how much progress we've made, what you've seen over the last, it's not even 10 years?
Yeah, so, as we brought the team together, we didn't know whether there'd be things to invest in. In fact, we've had to play a pretty strong role in that. A number of our companies, we brought together scientists and were essentially the founder, and that's gone extremely well for us. Some of our highest impact companies came out of that, playing a role in the formation. We, in the early days, the best case was you'd go into the lab and see something, and some guy was making a piece of metal that big or a piece of cement that big, and they'd say, well, of course, at this scale, it's 10 times more inefficient than it needs to be, but if you just give me a few $100 million, I'll make this really big thing, and I think it'll be more efficient. I mean, hey, the scaling laws might apply to these things, and that's really what we had. But now many of the companies are moving to that next stage. I always hesitate to give examples because we have so many wonderful companies, but just to pick a few, Carbon Cure is in that cement space. They're out in 800 locations now, eliminating a massive amount of emissions.
Woo! That's great. That's great.
Hold your applause.
There's more. Wait, there's more.
Boston Metals now got this factory in Brazil, and they found a way to make the economics very powerful as they come in part of the steel market and then expand into others. Form Energy, there's this beautiful looking plant in West Virginia.
Amazing. It's amazing.
That is going to give them a lot of output capacity. Kobold's our sort of AI-driven mineral discovery company that's staked some pretty phenomenal claims, including for large amounts of copper that sort of unavoidably we need a lot more. Redwood's built these factories to do the battery recycling and proven that that'll be a very effective business. Pivot Bio, which is kind of a miracle way of reducing the need for fertilizer, is gaining the understanding of farmers that this product really does allow them to save money, reduce environmental damage, and with huge climate benefits, and we'll be able to scale that in terms of the crops they're addressing, geographies they're addressing on a global basis. We have companies that are seeing massive demand. Luxwell's building a factory, I think, in Michigan to meet the demand. AeroSeal keeps expanding their customer base. TS Conductors, sort of a magic way of more than doubling the amount of electricity you can use in a right-of-way, and they've got orders that are causing them to increase their factory capacity. So, the rubber is hitting the road in terms of, getting these companies out there, and those are, great business models. In the digital revolution, now we have 7 of the 8 most valuable companies in the world come from that digital revolution. I'm not saying in clean tech we'll necessarily get to that level, but if you're helping to solve climate, the chance of building very large, very profitable companies, goes right along with the scale of exactly what we need to do.
Yeah. Well, so can we applaud now? That's for all those companies and many more, right? As Bill said, that was just a few. There's 165. I think I got that right. It sounds a little too precise, but maybe it's 166 companies in the breakthrough energy family, from fellows to ventures to catalysts. So just amazing innovators that are leading. And again, like I said earlier, I mean, boy, 10 years ago, we didn't have anything. And as Bill just said, those were all of the areas that, you'll hear continuously that are driving down emissions in every area, all across the 5 grand challenges, all the things we need to drive global emissions down to zero. And it's just fantastic to watch that grow. What was your, I was, I followed you because I follow you, and it was great to get the baton, I would say, in the very earliest days, but I couldn't have contemplated this. Did you see something like this?
Hopefully.
You were hoping, yeah.
In the digital realm, the number of innovators was pretty amazing. Now, there's a simplification there that, you just write your product and put it out there, people try it out. And so you don't have regulatory, you don't have the same degree of capital involved. And as Václav Smil says, you digital guys are the most spoiled people because you just don't understand that in the real world you have to build things, and they have to withstand arbitrary weather, and that it's way, way more difficult than you think it is. And he's absolutely right. Yep. And we've tried to maintain that deep realism about, okay, this one is about replacing most of the industrial economy. We knew we'd need a lot of companies because the sources of emission are very broad. Even if you solve electricity, which no single technology will do all of that, you'll still need it in so many other places. Yeah. I will say that it happened more quickly in terms of having great companies to invest in. Human ingenuity is phenomenal. And even in areas like steel and cement, where you could say, okay, in history, how many advances there have been? Very finite number, and we were the world at large viewed what we had there as fulfilling our needs until the recognition that the climate constraint meant that those processes were wrong. And those were the two I would have put at the top of the list. I no longer would put those at the top of the list. I might put, getting e-fuels or biofuels to be cheap now at the top of the list. That's a very daunting thing. Eric will remind us of the key parameters that make that one hard, but possible as we do these things. So, cows, rice, steel, cement. I see a clear path from the ideas and science that are in this pavilion to making those essentially zero emission areas of the economy. And that I would not have expected. But the faith in innovation really paid off.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Well, you said you hoped for it. You didn't know, right? Of course you didn't know, but you hoped that it would be the case. And of course, your belief in human ingenuity, which, I've gotten the chance to work with you for almost 15 years now, and you've always said that, and it's just so, as I said earlier, inspiring to see that vision come to life. It's been absolutely incredible. So, what do you see now? We got this pipeline. We had to do step one, build the foundation, that's a pipeline of innovative companies in all of the 5 grand challenge areas. So that's what we did, really, let's call it the first 10 years since we've been at this. It's not even that long. What do you see for the next 10 years?
Well, first, let me talk a little bit about artificial intelligence, how it comes into this, and will be a very significant accelerant. In fact, we have a breakout panel with some experts in that area that I think people will find absolutely fascinating. AI is something that, even in my earliest days in high school, I was fascinated by, because the idea of, okay, how far can software go in comparison to human capabilities? And that goes all the way back to early computer science work, people like Alan Turing. The fact that in the last 2 years ago, we reached a milestone where AI's ability to essentially read and understand knowledge became mainstream, and that those AI techniques can take scientific things like the shapes of proteins or how various materials work. That's going to mean not just a lot of chatbots, but our basic scientific understandings in complex fields, including biology, will move a lot faster. And so for each of our companies, we're saying, okay, your discoveries are good here, but how can you use AI to take those to the new level? Even things like the grid and the complexity of the grid, we'll use AI both for the grid modeling, and we'll use AI to manage the grid and all the very complex things going on. AI will be used even on fusion reactors, where the control problem is very complex, and sometimes the speed of the AI models allows them to do a far better job. So I can't overstate in all of breakthrough energy, but in health, education, this is going to be very surprising. I think Vinod will underscore that because he's very involved in the companies driving this forward. Beyond AI, the next 10 years are, I'd say our theme will be scaling, but we'll be scaling in the face of a lot of uncertainty. We'll have political uncertainty. Elections will bring in governments whose policies relative to climate will be somewhat more or less favorable. The geopolitics will be very complex. The willingness to take low-cost products out of China and take advantage of those, which is good in some ways, but can affect domestic job markets, and so politicians will be making trade-offs in those things. And this uncertainty is tricky when you're building things that the economic justification is over, say, a 30-year lifetime, or even longer than that for some of this infrastructure. So the creativity we'll have to bring as we scale, and scale things up in various regions of the world. The Middle East will emerge as a very important place where a lot of these technologies will get developed. It won't just be the US, Europe, and China, but many other locations as well. The scaling thing means that we'll have to engage traditional finance. Whenever you talk trillions, you're not talking just people who want to do risky things. You're talking about big pension funds, sovereign wealth funds coming in with substantial amount of their assets. And we saw at COP28 that at least in some of these areas, some electricity generation, some electric car thing, now we are tapping into those big amounts of capital. But we're not across even the industrial things where I'm saying that the path there is pretty clear. So, we'll be measured by scale. the amount of emissions abated, which is kind of your final grade as this pipeline goes along, the amount of emissions we've abated with our technology so far is quite small. And yet by 2040, that number has to be absolutely gigantic. And so scaling, not just in rich countries, but also in middle-income countries will be the real test. And there will be surprises along the way, things that don't work, policies that get changed in a way, and trying to keep those things to be steady and, drive maturation, that'll push all of us. It will continue to be challenging, even though we have this incredible base that you're seeing with the companies.
Yeah, I'm just, again, reflecting back on when we started, and you're right, we have to draw in others, a different type of capital than we have today, and we're lucky. We have so many amazing partners now, even, like I mentioned, visionary sovereign wealth funds, endowments, other financial institutions, pension plans that are actually partners and here with us today. And so we're starting to see it, and I just reflect back on when we started Breakthrough, the venture community did not want to do this. And we had great partners like Vinod, who you mentioned, and John Doerr, who's here. So John's talking about speed and scale, what you just said. John, we're getting ready. This is the decade now when we get to start to scale, get ready to scale. So that's what we see over the next 10 years. And of course, it's hard. It is very hard. I said that like 7 times. It is hard. But that's what we're built for. That's what we do at Breakthrough. That's what this network does. That's why you are all so important. We take on the hard things because the world needs us to do it. So with that, Bill, we're going to wrap up here in about 5 minutes. What do you want this group to do? You have an amazing group of partners that we've assembled over the last 9 years. So that is people from technology, people from policy, people from the capital markets, the big levers that we need to pull on to bring about a clean industrial revolution. So here's a moment to challenge this group. What do we need to do in the next year, the next 5 years, the next 10 years to make the scaled up vision? So the innovation's here, we have it demonstrated, we're on a learning curve, and then we can really roll it out to drive global emissions down to zero. What do you want this group to do?
Well, I think a good example where we're drawing people together to understand what the roadblocks are is these various clean tech groups, that we pulled together. And actually, that was pioneered in Europe, where both at the country level and regional level and Europe level as a whole now, we're taking both clean tech companies, including lots that are that Breakthrough didn't invest in, and bringing them together with the clean tech investors and hearing, okay, what is holding you back? Is it access to capital? Is it the regulations? Maybe you invented your idea in one country, but the place that you will find their scale-up may be different. Even within the United States, we're seeing that where it's a different decision of where you build your first plant than where you do the initial lab work. So I think the clean tech industry has to emerge as having a voice, a clear voice, and that will be across different areas. I also think we need to be responsive to the pushback. We've seen in a lot of countries where, okay, you have to buy an electric heat pump, or the farmers, can't continue what they're doing. Yeah. Unless we start to bring the innovation in, we're going to create this conflict where we say, hey, what do you care about, farmers or clean tech? Yeah. And I don't think we would win, if you get a general thing of, okay, who's got, the political will. So unless they, in particular, are seeing that we can take the constraints that they're being put under for fairly good reasons, yeah, but use innovation so that they, by and large, can continue to have success. That type of dialogue where it's not just the clean tech industry saying, hey, get out of our way, yeah, but we maintain a sense of political consensus, understanding that money is very short. I mean, With interest rates up, with debt levels high, defense spending sadly has to go up. Healthcare spending has to go up. Through my work at the Gates Foundation, I see this shortage. Sometimes the climate movement is like, okay, there must be another place for money to come from, and there's not. It involves very difficult trade-offs, and sadly, as you get things like a war in Ukraine, people's time frame is more short-term. And so figuring out, okay, how, given these constraints, and yet this very bold mission, where can we make progress? I think that's important. And that really means a scale of partnerships, that didn't exist before. This conference, we have more of the leading edge big companies here, looking at the small companies. Some will get bought, some they'll just do partnerships working together. That's very important. The big companies bring such a range of skills in terms of complex projects, relationships with governments. Every once in a while you'll have something like a Tesla where something is a startup and it goes all the way and it's just independent and it shows the rest of the industry, okay, guys.
Better move.
You better, my valuation is equal to all of you put together, so maybe you should pay attention that, there's something to this new approach being taken. And okay, maybe we'll have, a few like that.
Yeah, 7 or 8 of those in the breakthrough energy family, that'd be fine.
Yeah, but, there's, hopefully that's not the case in, steel and cement and, geological hydrogen, that I think the speed will come through those partnerships. So, I get excited about the kind of side conversations that will take place here, or when an executive goes around the booth and goes back and says, hey guys, our plan for cement is to brute force CCS. And I saw somebody who said, no, the cost of green cement will be less than the cost of normal cement, which of course, if you're adding CCS, you can never achieve that. It's it is by definition a green premium to fund both the energy and the capital cost associated with that. So I'd say that, we're looking to people here to consider those partnerships. Some of the big companies are now co-investors in with our companies, and that's been so helpful, not just for the financial piece, but for the understanding they bring of their industry and the complex constraints that exist there. So, that's part of the theme of getting everybody together, is not only to energize them, but to get specific relationships that come out of it.
Indeed, indeed. Well, I hope you are energized. You should be energized. We have made so much progress over the last 10 years. We have not been at this that long, and we've come a long ways. We, of course, have a long way to go. And I think a way to capture what you just said is, a quote from your dad: we are all in this together, and we need each other. So that's what we're doing. That's what Breakthrough Energy is about. Every sector, every stage, every lever for everyone, we can bring about a clean industrial revolution. We will see you more throughout the course of this conference. Bill and I will be back at the very end. Thank you so much for being here. Let's go do it. Thank you.
About the problem we're facing here. Let's not sugarcoat it. This is the hardest thing humanity will ever have to do.
We really need to help the world get to a spot where we can deliver reliable, affordable energy solutions to everyone without creating emissions.
It's really thinking about how do we accelerate innovation from the lab all the way through large-scale deployment and commercialization. So we think about it in 3 development stages, what we call the 3Ds.
The first is that we need to discover new technologies. So we have a program called the Fellows Program that is looking way, way, way over the horizon, trying to find those breakthrough ideas in the lab with scientists that can reduce emissions annually by 1%. The next phase is development, and that's really our Breakthrough Energy Ventures team that is for-profit investing in companies to develop those technologies that are transformative ideas and turn them into real market solutions. And then deployment. And so that's really focused on our Catalyst program, which is once technologies are developed and ready to go to market, you have to build something, a factory, a plant, a facility that actually produces the good that the market wants to buy at some scale. Those things are hard to finance because they're new technologies, so we created a program to fill that gap in the marketplace. So we need scientists to come up with great ideas. We need entrepreneurs to turn those ideas into reality. We need financiers to actually fund projects and build things that enable those new ideas to get scaled out in the marketplace. We need policymakers and government officials to create the market incentives that allow us to make a rapid transformation from business as usual to a new way of delivering reliable, affordable energy without emissions.
So if we do our job exactly right, what we're really delivering is innovation, and innovation is hope. Because through the work that we're doing, we're ultimately going to be able to deliver clean, abundant energy to everyone.
Please welcome to the stage Chief Technology Officer and Managing Partner, Ventures of Breakthrough Energy, Dr. Eric Toone.
Well, good morning. What a wonderful event to be at. Energy is prosperity. Energy is how we make things. Energy is how we move things. Energy is how we warm our homes and prepare our food. Energy is prosperity. Over the last century and a half, the subset of the planet of this a population of this planet learned how to harness a legacy resource of fossil energy and created prosperity the likes of which have never been seen on planet Earth. But we know now that that bargain was Faustian. The use of that fossil resource produced greenhouse gases that today threaten to make our planet uninhabitable. Today I want to talk to you about how we got to this point in time, and more importantly, how we can move forward. How we can move forward and how we can't move forward with the most important challenge of our time. How to sustainably provide energy and the prosperity that comes with it for the entire planet. If you lived in America in 1830, you were probably involved in agriculture, because in 1830, 70% of the American population was involved in agriculture. And that work was backbreaking. An acre of wheat took 56 worker hours to farm and produce just 15 bushels. Your day began at dawn and it ended at dusk. There was no artificial light. Your heat came from wood. Your transportation was by animals. If you didn't emigrate, you probably never traveled more than 50 miles from where you were born. Artificial light was arguably society's greatest need at that time, and by the early 19th century, whale oil had emerged as the source of choice for that light. But by 1850, whales are becoming scarce. They've been overhunted. Whalers have to travel ever farther to find whales. The price of whale oil becomes too expensive. A new alternative is needed. Already by 1846, Adam Gessner, a Canadian geologist, had demonstrated that he could extract a material that had almost ideal properties for light from coal. And he called that kerosene. But production was problematic. You couldn't get enough of it. And so it wasn't practical. In 1851, Samuel Martin Kayer demonstrated that a very similar material could be extracted from oil, and he started selling his product as carbon oil. The last piece of the puzzle that was needed was a source of oil. Oil seeps had been known in Pennsylvania for a long time, but in 1959, the first well was drilled near Titusville, and the rush was on. John Rockefeller was involved in the production of oil almost from the very beginning. In 1870, he reorganized with his partner J.D. Flagler as Standard Oil, which rapidly became the largest company first in America and then in the world. Almost from the very beginning, a powerful relationship emerged between per capita GDP and per capita energy use. Access to artificial light changed the world in ways that today are difficult for us to imagine. In 1850, the average person used about 5 kilolumen hours of light per year. Today, the average person uses about 60 megalumen hours of light per year, a 12,000-fold increase. With access to artificial light, the workday lengthened, productivity increased. Improvements in diets and preparing food led to better health. Slowly but surely, these changes began an inexorable rise in prosperity. In the second half of the 19th century, oil was still used primarily for light, for kerosene. And what we call today gasoline and diesel were mostly a waste product. A number of researchers had been experimenting with the idea of electric light. But in 1879, Thomas Edison illuminated a carbon filament inside a high vacuum. Electric light was a practical reality. Kerosene prices plunged. But other innovation was on the march. In 1908, Ford produced the first Model T, introducing, for the first time, practical, affordable, gasoline-based transportation. By 1914, a Model T took only 93 minutes to assemble on a Ford line. And only 20 years after its introduction, 18 million were registered in America. In 1903, the Wright brothers flew at Kitty Hawk, introducing an entirely new form of transportation, again dependent on oil. And in 1927, Lindbergh crossed the Atlantic, shrinking the globe, shrinking the distance between continents. In a period of just 30 years, transportation had been transformed forever and to modes entirely dependent on oil, on cheap, abundant energy. Those trends only accelerated as we move forward. We said in 1830, 70% of the American population was involved in farm labor. By the turn of the century, that number was just 41%. And at the end of the Second World War, 7% of the American population was involved in agriculture. That acre of wheat that used to take 56 hours to produce 15 bushels now took 3 hours to produce 31 bushels, a 50-fold increase in productivity. If you lived in America in the middle of the 20th century, you were probably involved in manufacturing. Artificial light allowed you to control your day rather than your day to control you. Your heat came from oil or coal, and you traveled by car. The construction of the modern highway system enabled vast migratory trends and opened the entire continent to development. Those trends only accelerated as we moved through the second half of the 20th century, as the possibilities afforded by cheap, abundant energy became ever more clear. Today, less than 2% of the American population is involved in agriculture, and the United States ranks in the top 3 in more than half of all agricultural commodities. In 1980, 6 of the top 10 companies globally were oil companies. It's an extraordinary story. Real per capita GDP rose by 5-fold over the course of our story, and by 10-fold over the course of a century and a half. An extraordinary change. But there are challenges on the horizon. The use of that fossil energy produces greenhouse gases that lead to a rising temperature. The last time the surface of the ocean was as warm as it is today was 120,000 years ago, and sea level was 25 feet higher than it is today. The average elevation above sea level of London is 35 feet. The average elevation above sea level of Miami is 6 feet. 25 feet of sea level rise would submerge 9 of the 31 cities with more than 10 million people globally. If you melt every scrap of ice on this planet, how much does sea level rise by? 220 feet. The elevation above sea level of Tokyo, 131 feet. More than 2/3 of those cities with more than 10 million people would be submerged, and on the order of 1/3 of all humanity would be displaced. Together, clearly, these developments mandate the development of a new energy system. The scale of the challenge before us is extraordinary. Remember that with only 5% of the world's population, the United States is responsible for 20% of global emissions. But that makes sense because the United States is 25% of the global economy. 10% of the planet has no access to energy at all. Another 10% has only intermittent access. 3.5 billion people, half the population of this planet, lack access to clean energy for cooking. The challenges are enormous. Raising these people from poverty and providing energy will more than double energy demand by the end of the century. But it's the greatest challenge of our time and one that we really have to accept. And we have to accept that we're going to have to do it across 200 countries with every conceivable manner of governance. As we talk about how we might do that today, then, we have to remember the ground rules. And the ground rules are these. First, energy is prosperity. And the entire world has a right to the same level of prosperity that the OECD world enjoys today. The second, 85% of all of our energy today comes from fossil fuels. And the third, global energy demand will double by the end of the century. Well, against this backdrop, as you heard, in 2015, Breakthrough Energy was created. By now, Breakthrough Energy has supported 165 companies across all 5 areas that we invest in: electricity, transportation, buildings, manufacturing, and agriculture. When we were together last, 18 months ago in Seattle, I talked about some of the lessons that we'd learned over the first 5 years at Breakthrough Energy. Today, I want to do something a little bit different. Today, I want to look forward. Today, I want to talk about how we're going to address this challenge of providing the world clean energy. I want to talk about things that could work and things that I don't think will work. I want to understand how we address this greatest challenge of our time, how we provide clean energy to the entire planet and the prosperity that comes with it. Well, let's think about the first one we could tackle. Perhaps the biggest lever we have for decarbonization is electrification. Electrify everything. Electrify sectors that today are powered by thermal processes fueled by fossil fuels. Electrify transportation. Electrify buildings. Electrify manufacturing. Well, there's a couple of things that we need to think about. If we're going to do that, we're obviously going to massively increase our demand for electricity. By some estimates, electrifying those sectors would increase demand for electricity by on the order of 3 times or 4 times, a massive increase in the amount of electricity that we would need. And secondly, of course, it's only going to help us if that electricity is carbon-free. Well, let's think about how we produce electricity today. Let's think about what demand for electricity looks like across the course of a single day. If I look at electricity demand across the course of a day in the summertime, in the wintertime, there's some pretty striking characteristics. The first is there's an amount of energy that I always need. Doesn't matter what time of the day or night it is, there's some base load amount of energy that we need. So we'll call that base load demand. And then there's a piece that changes across the course of a day as people go about their business. And we'll call that dispatchable or load following electricity. So however I produce electricity, I'm going to have to be able to generate something that looks like this. What's my cost target? Doesn't make any sense to talk about producing more electricity if I don't have a cost target. Here's a really important one to remember. People are not going to pay a premium for electricity. People are not going to pay a premium for electricity. Prosperity is an immediate need. The consequences of that energy, whatever they are a long-term result. People massively underestimate the value of future events. So if we tell people they're going to have to pay a green premium to avoid a future event, they're not going to pay any attention to us. The cheapest way there is to produce electricity that looks like this is natural gas and coal. Natural gas is great if you have it, but it's distributed unevenly across the globe, and it's difficult to move around. So if you don't have natural gas, coal. Right now, coal costs about $100 a megawatt hour to produce electricity from. 10 cents a kilowatt hour. So that is going to be our cost target. So how are we going to do that? Well, we know that some of the cheapest electricity on Earth today comes from wind and solar. Solar electricity is far below $100 a megawatt hour. It's below $20 a megawatt hour. Some of it is as cheap as $10 a megawatt hour. So let's think about doing this with solar. 2013, the California Independent System Operator published what became, for the first time, what became known as the duck curve. And this duck curve tracks solar production and energy use across the course of a day. And what they showed is something that was really pretty obvious, and that is I get energy from solar when the sun shines. I get energy from wind when the wind blows. And those times of production don't necessarily correspond to times of use. So how am I going to deal with that? Well, I could store energy when I have it in times of abundance and use it when I have times of need. So let's think about that. We're pretty good at making batteries, right? We should be able to do that. Let's think about that. Well, intermittency in the context of the grid is actually a series of unrelated events that happen at very different time constants. Over very short periods of time, seconds to minutes, we have to deal with the fact that we use alternating current, and the frequency of that current has to be maintained. So as individual loads, as individual generations come on and off the grid, I have to maintain that frequency to a very tight tolerance. As I go to slightly longer time domains, say minutes to hours, I have another set of unrelated events that lead to intermittency. So this, for instance, is a real output from solar energy from a facility in Arizona across the course of a day. And you can see that at various times we have significant reductions in output from this facility compared to the average. So I'm going to have to deal with things that happen with time constants of minutes to hours. We can keep going further than that. Over hours to days, I have to think about other kinds of intermittency. Weather, for instance. I have cloudy days or a rainy week. This is wind output plotted with energy use from a facility in Texas over the course of a week. And you can see here that wind output mostly happens at night, energy use mostly happens in the day. So to deal with this intermittency, I'm going to have to store energy for hours or for days to shift it to when I need it. But we can keep going. We know that you don't get as much sun every day of the year. For everybody that was up early this morning, it was light at 5 o'clock. Solar insolation in Northern Europe is 5 times in the summer what it is in the winter. So if I'm going to use solar energy, I'm either going to have to massively overbuild this, or I'm going to have to store months' worth of energy across the course of a year. But let's keep going, because there's actually time constants even longer than that. We tend to think of hydro as dispatchable power. It's always there. I can turn it on and off whenever I want, but it's not. Hydro is just solar energy with a little bit of storage. The sun evaporates water, makes clouds, it rains, and I catch it behind a dam. 63% of Brazil's electricity comes from hydro. Brazil is currently in the middle of a decade-long drought, and hydro production is down by more than 70%. And how do they make up with that for that deficit? They burn coal. They burn coal. And over the same period of time, electricity prices in Brazil have nearly doubled. We've seen similar events with wind in Germany. 2020, 2021, wind speeds dropped and wind output fell by more than a quarter. And how did they make up for that deficit? They burned coal. And Germany has some of the most expensive electricity on Earth. Recently, the Royal Society conducted a study of wind output in the North Sea, a nice windy place. And they looked at wind output in the North Sea over a 50-year period. And they discovered that when you look at it over that long a period, there are years when wind output is down by more than 50%. So now, if I'm going to use storage to deal with with these intermittencies, I'm going to have to store years' worth of energy for decades at a time. Well, let's think about the cost implications of this as well. It turns out that there's an inverse relationship between the time period I need to store energy for and what I can afford to spend on it. Very short periods of time, I can afford to spend a lot on storage. Longer periods of time, I can spend less on storage. One way to think about it is it's just how many times do I get to amortize that CapEx, right? If I'm doing storage over the course of a year, I get to amortize that CapEx once over the course of a year. By the time I get to 8 or 10 hours, things like lithium-ion batteries are too expensive. By the time I get to a couple of weeks, even things like iron-air batteries are too expensive. But we're going to have to do this for decades. And what about the scale? What about the scale of storage that I'm going to have to build out? This is the Tesla Gigafactory. This is the largest battery production facility on Earth in Nevada. Annual output from the Tesla Gigafactory stores 3 minutes of the US grid. It would take 1,000 years of production from the Tesla Gigafactory to store 2 days worth of US energy. So how is this going to work? It's not. Intermittent wind and solar energy is a tremendous way to make very cheap electricity. Very cheap electricity, and that has value. But it's a terrible way to make dispatchable electricity. If we're going to rely on electricity as a part of this transition, then our electricity is going to have to be reliable. We can't use intermittent sources that have intermittencies over this period of time uncorrelated. We've seen over and over again that when people try to do that, they inevitably run into shortages. And when they run into shortages, they burn fossil fuels to deal with those shortages. And it has an important impact on the price of that electricity. All right, well, what are we going to do? If we can't use intermittent energy sources, we're going to have to think of something else. We have only 3 energy sources available to us: the energy that comes from the sun, the energy that's stored in the earth as heat, and nuclear energy. We've seen the challenges with solar energy in whatever form. Are there other ways to do it? In 1980, it would cost you $50,000 to put a kilogram of material into space. Today, that number is $500, dropped by 2 orders of magnitude, and it continues to fall towards $100 a kilogram. And so all of a sudden, things like space-based solar that just a few years ago were lunacy are not so lunatic. And both NASA and the European Space Agency are looking into the possibility of space-based solar. Geothermal remains a massively underutilized resource. New technologies have relieved some of the limitations of geothermal. Long ago, you needed heat, water, and permeability. Now we know we can introduce permeability and water, and so a large fraction of the United States, for instance, is amenable to geothermal. There's a lot more we can do, especially by going to higher temperatures. Temperatures approaching 400 and 500 degrees Celsius. That'll require new technology for drilling. It'll require new technology for building and operating reservoirs. And then there's nuclear. In nuclear energy, what I do is I convert mass into energy. The amount of energy that's released when I do that is enormous. The conversion of a kilogram of mass into energy releases 25 terawatt hours of energy. The planet uses about 28,000 terawatt hours of energy per year. So the conversion of just a little over a ton of mass to energy releases as much energy as the whole planet uses in a year. There are 2 ways that I can release that energy, that nuclear energy. The first is fission, where I take a heavy nucleus and break it into 2 lighter nuclei, where the sum of the mass of the 2 lighter nuclei is less, a little bit less than what I started with. And the other way that I can do this is fusion, when I take 2 light nuclei and fuse them together into a heavier nucleus, where the mass of the heavier nucleus is a little bit less than what I started with. Nuclear fission today produces about 10% of the world's electricity. That number has been constant or slightly falling since 1979, since the time of the 3 Mile Island accident. After 3 Mile Island, the cost of building nuclear rose 5-fold. to deal with the safety challenges of nuclear fission. And those are essentially threefold. Waste, the products of nuclear fission are radioactive for millennia, and so they would have to be stored for thousands of years. The products of nuclear fission are fissile and can be weaponized. And the third is that fission is inherently a chain reaction, so it is inherently susceptible to runaway reaction. Today, there are a number of new reactor designs that are under development. NuScale has a new reactor, TerraPower has a new reactor, reactors that are designed to deal with these safety issues, new fuel forms. But what's the cost entitlement? Well, we don't know because we won't build nuclear reactors. So we have a double whammy. We have a new technology that hasn't been deployed at scale, so I don't know what its cost entitlement is. And then the second thing is we stopped building reactors in the 1980s. So we've lost the muscle memory of how to do these things. We have to get back to building nuclear fission. It's almost impossible to see a universe where we do what we're trying to do that doesn't have nuclear fission. And then there's fusion. The attraction of fusion has always been that it suffers none of the limitations of fission. The products of nuclear fusion are radioactive for decades, so I don't have to store them essentially forever. They're not fissile, so they can't be weaponized. And it's not a chain reaction, so I don't have to worry about runaway reactions. So where are we with fusion today? Well, the old joke about fusion is that fusion's 30 years away and it always will be. But that's really not where we are today. That's really not where we are today. The fundamental challenge with fusion is how do you get those two nuclei to reach each other? The enormous repulsive forces of atoms stops that. There are essentially two approaches to doing that. One is to create a plasma where I strip all the electrons away so that two nuclei can find each other. And the second is inertial confinement fusion, where I use the enormous power of lasers to jam those two things together. The former is by far the most common, and the most common geometry for the vessel designed to hold that plasma is a tokamak, the familiar donut-shaped device that everybody has seen. Today, over 200 tokamaks have been built and operated globally. This is not some strange niche thing anymore. And a number of those have operated at very close to breakthrough energy and could have produced more energy than they consumed if people had just added more fuel. Today, there are commercial companies who are building full-scale reactors and who say that they'll put electrons onto the grid within 10 years. So nuclear fusion is a challenge, and it has always been a challenge, and I understand the sort of bad rep that it gets. But the potential is enormous, and we're a lot closer than people think we are. And we have to try it. We have to try it. We don't know. I said our mark was $100 a megawatt hour. We have no idea what the cost entitlement is because we haven't built one. And we'll never know what the cost entitlement is until we do build one. And so we have to work forward on developing these. It seems that there is no chance of doing what we need to do without nuclear energy, fission, or fusion. Okay, so now we've made electrons. Now we've made energy. What do we do with it? We distribute energy using the grid. The grid is often sort of an afterthought. People imagine it's sort of poles hung on wires. I create a generator of some sort, I attach it to those wires, and the energy moves through those wires to where it needs to go. That's not the right way to think about the grid. Remember that we use alternating current. That means if I'm going to use rotating machinery to produce electricity, and that is mostly how we produce electricity, that rotating machinery all has to be synchronized. It all has to be spinning at exactly the same rate and synchronized. In the United States, there are 25,000 generators distributed at 10,000 sites, and they all spin at the same rate and in the same time. It's extraordinary. It's absolutely extraordinary. The grid connects users and generators in a way that's completely different from any other dispatchable resource, in the sense that users don't schedule when they need electricity. You don't call a power company and tell them when you're going to cook dinner. Users don't schedule use, and generators don't store. Rather, the whole thing operates in unison. And neither are generators nor users isolated. There's not a power plant that powers your house. Rather, the whole thing operates in some giant mesh. It's really extraordinary that it works. We operate the grid by modeling supply and demand, typically a day in advance. And that modeling exercise used to be pretty straightforward. Generators were dispatchable and could be scheduled. The use of rotating machinery meant that there was an enormous amount of inertia in the system, which allowed me to stabilize the frequency of the grid. There was no cross-sector coupling. I didn't have to worry about the building sector or the transportation sector. Power flows were one direction. I could model the distribution grid simply as a load, and on and on and on and on. When I simultaneously grow and decarbonize the grid, all of that stuff goes out the window. Now, if I'm using wind and solar, I site my generators where the resource is, not where the load is. And that complicates transmission. It often means transmission happens over very great distances. And those transmission pathways vary with the weather. As I stop using rotating machinery to produce electricity, grid inertia goes down. As people start using distributed solar, I can't model the distribution grid as a load anymore, but rather I have two-way power flows. And on and on and on and on. It rapidly becomes impossible to calculate an exact solution for how the grid is going to operate. And people have to resort to an increasingly tenuous set of approximations. The modeling has to be done over 5 orders of magnitude in time and in distance. Recently, the City of Los Angeles partnered with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory to model what a carbon-free grid would look like for the City of Los Angeles. That study took 10 years and used 25 CPU hours of the NREL supercomputer to model just 4 static solutions. 4 static solutions in 10 years. We have to develop new ways to operate the grid. We have to develop new ways to model the grid. We have to build a device that we can work, that will work with intermittent and dispatchable resources together. So where does all this leave us? Well, electrification is absolutely the most powerful lever that we have to decarbonize thermal processes. It is absolutely the most powerful lever that we have. But we have to be realistic about what we can do. We can't build a grid with intermittent resource. We're going to have to use dispatchable sources of energy. And we're going to have to think about how we model the grid and how we operate the grid at the outset, not as an afterthought. All right, well, let's think about another big source of emissions. Let's think about transportation. The EIA says now transportation is about 8 gigatons of emissions, and that has roughly doubled over the past 30 years. And so has come a familiar call to end oil. Well, let's think about that a little bit. So first of all, ending oil is going to be challenging for a lot of modes of transportation. 6 of that 8 gigatons is light-duty cars and trucks. That can certainly be electrified. It's going to take time, but it can be electrified. Heavy-duty transportation, heavy-duty trucking, shipping, aviation need the extraordinary energy density of liquid fuels, right? So liquid fuels are going to be with us for a very long time. But let's just leave that aside. Let's never mind that. Let's suppose we could electrify all that. What would it mean to actually end oil? Well, oil, of course, isn't a single compound. Oil is instead an enormous mixture of compounds. And the nature of that mixture depends on where the oil comes from. So oil from 2 wells in 2 different locations would have a very different chemical composition. We separate those components in the refining process, essentially distillation. At the beginning of the oil age, in the late 19th century, the part of oil that was mostly used was the light part, kerosene for light, naphtha for cooking. And what we today call gasoline and kerosene was mostly wasted, often just dumped. More than half of a barrel of oil was just dumped. And so, almost from the very beginning, began a search for other things I could do with the rest of that barrel of oil. So, for example, candles in the first half of the 19th century were made from beeswax, not a viable source for large-scale production, and they were basically a novelty. By 1850, people were starting to extract paraffins from oil and using them to make candles, driving down the cost. When Europeans arrived in North America, they found that the indigenous people used a chewing gum made of spruce sap, and they followed suit, and that was what chewing gum was. Again, by the 1850s, Paraffins from oil replaced spruce gum and became more popular than spruce gum. In the 1860s, petroleum jelly became used, and it was branded as Vaseline in 1870. In 1872, Thomas Edison patented wax paper. People discovered that pigments, colorants that wouldn't dissolve in water could be dissolved in some of the hydrocarbons from oil, and oil-based paints became a thing. By the time we get to 1885, there are 350 products from oil at market. Well, we saw that as we moved into the 20th century, the dominant use of oil became transportation, gasoline and diesel. Still, an enormous fraction of a barrel of oil was wasted, and the search continued unabated for other things that we could do with the whole barrel of oil. First came cracking, where chemists discovered that they could take large molecules that were too heavy to be useful for transportation and break them into smaller pieces. But the modern petrochemical industry really kicked off in the 1960s with the advent of steam methane reforming. In steam methane reforming, I take a hydrocarbon, mostly methane, but you could really use any hydrocarbon you want, and I convert that to a mixture of hydrogen and carbon monoxide. That mixture is both high energy and very reactive. And chemists can convert it to all sorts of things. You can turn it into liquid fuels. You can turn it into chemicals. In fact, the chemical industry produces just 7 intermediate compounds from the synthesis gas reaction: ethylene, propylene, butadiene, benzene, toluene, xylene, and methanol. And from that group of 7 compounds produces 6,000 compounds that undergird every single aspect of modern life. 65% of all of the fabrics that we wear come from oil. Specialty polymers for biomedicine, agrochemicals and coatings, surfactants, sealants, adhesives, on and on. The list goes on and on and on. Everything from ballpoint pens to swimming pools. Everything from refrigerants to dental adhesives. So look, a 42-gallon barrel of oil produces about 20 gallons of gasoline. It produces about 15 gallons of diesel and jet fuel. But every drop of that barrel of oil gets used. Every drop. And even more importantly, the economics of every drop of that barrel of oil depends on the economics of every other drop in that barrel of oil. There's no way I can take a little slice out of this thing and imagine that it's going to operate in a vacuum the way it did in context. If we're going to end oil, if we're really going to end oil, and never mind the fact that we're still going to need liquid fuels, if we're going to end oil, we better figure out how we're going to make those 6,000 compounds, or at least those 7 intermediates, at cost and at scale. Well, how am I going to do that? We said that syngas is the key. If I can get to synthesis gas, I can do anything. I can make fuels, I can make those intermediates, I can make almost anything when I get to synthesis gas. But if this is going to be zero carbon, if I'm going to be able to make fuels that I can use to fly jets and things like that, I need 2 things. I need a zero carbon source of hydrogen, and I need a zero carbon source of CO2. That is to say, if I'm going to burn it and put the carbon back into the atmosphere, it had to come out of the atmosphere in the first place so that there's no net addition of CO2 to the atmosphere. So how am I going to do that? On Mount Olympus in southwest Turkey, the rocks spout flames. Flames literally come out of the ground. This has been known since antiquity. Ancient sailors used the region for navigation. The original Olympic flame was lit from these fires. When people got around to looking what is the gas that comes out of the ground and burns, they discovered it's hydrogen. 5,000 miles away in Los Fuegos Eternos in the Philippines, flames again spout a foot out of the ground. And again, when we looked at the composition of the gas that was burning, we find it's 50% hydrogen. But the events that really stimulated the activity around so-called natural hydrogen happened in Mali in North Africa towards the end of the in 1980s. In 1983, villagers there drilling for water drilled a well that was about 110 meters, and it exploded. They assumed that they drilled into natural gas, and so they plugged the well. In 2014, people went back and unplugged the well to start extracting the natural gas, and very quickly discovered it wasn't natural gas. It was hydrogen, pure hydrogen, pure hydrogen. Since that time, 25 additional wells have been drilled around the region in the same reservoir, and hydrogen flows from all of those wells. Today, they use that hydrogen for electricity. In retrospect, it's really not that surprising that hydrogen would come out of the ground. The earliest reference that we can find in the scientific literature to hydrogen coming out of the ground is in the 1880s, when people observed it leaking from cracks in coal seams. There was a large discussion in the scientific literature in the 1970s and 1980s about the origin of abiotic oil. We knew for a long time there's a whole bunch of oil that doesn't come from decaying organic material. We knew that from isotopic analysis. So where does it come from? And the consensus was it was the reaction of hydrogen and CO2 in the ground to produce that oil. And around the world in various places, in Australia, in Brazil, in eastern North Carolina, these so-called fairy circles turn up. These are circular depressions in the ground, often near water, and from the periphery of those fairy circles, hydrogen is emitted. So we've known hydrogen comes out of the ground for a long time. So why does this matter? Why do I care? Hydrogen is pure reactive chemical energy. If I have enough hydrogen and it's cheap enough, I can do anything. Hydrogen is the Swiss Army knife of energy. I can make materials, I can make steel, I can make fuels. We even had fun playing around. You could make food at cost-competitive prices if your hydrogen is cheap enough. So how cheap is it? Well, estimates are that hydrogen at the wellhead from this natural hydrogen will be on the order of $1 a kilogram or less. It's extraordinarily low cost. And is there a lot of it? The origin of this hydrogen is still a little bit under debate, but most people, I think, believe that it comes from the reaction of iron 2 and water. If that's true, you're limited only by the amount of iron 2 in the Earth's crust. And that number is effectively infinite. Jeff Ellis at the United States Geologic Survey has estimated that the accessible resource may be as large as 1 trillion tons. 1 trillion tons of hydrogen is enough to power all of humanity for thousands of years. So there's a lot of work left to be done. How do we get it out of the ground? How do we find it? All of those kinds of things. But make no mistake, this is the most important discovery in energy in our lifetime, and probably the most important discovery in energy in our children's lifetime. Another really interesting aspect of geologic hydrogen is it's a way to make that load following or dispatchable power. Today, we make most of that load following electricity by burning natural gas in turbines. I can also burn hydrogen in turbines, or I can convert hydrogen directly to electricity in fuel cells. So that load following component becomes possible with hydrogen, zero carbon. I have to move it. There's about 2.5 million miles of natural gas and oil pipeline in the United States. There's about 1,700 miles of hydrogen pipeline in the United States. That's because some kinds of steel react with hydrogen in a process called embrittlement. There's new technology that's needed to understand how we can stop that embrittlement process. Or we need to build out new infrastructure with new materials that aren't susceptible to embrittlement. There's work to be done, but these are problems that can be solved. Well, if I've got hydrogen now, effectively an infinite amount of hydrogen at a very low cost, the other thing I need is carbon. And we said if we're going to use this process, at least to some extent, to make fuels, then that carbon has to be zero carbon. It has to come out of the air. How are we going to do that? Well, we know that there's already a lot of technology being developed, companies operating to extract CO2 from the atmosphere for sequestration, to just store it. But that process today is still far too expensive. Carbon capture directly out of the air is on the order of $500 to $1,000 a ton. Just for context, if you have to pay $100 a ton for your carbon to make fuels, it adds about 85 cents to the cost of a gallon of gasoline. So if I have to pay $500 a ton, I'm already out of range before I do anything else. So the costs of carbon capture have to go way, way, way down before we can use it as a reagent. I can also use biomass, right? Plants extract CO2 from the air autonomously using sunlight as an energy source. And I can convert this biomass into syngas, so I can go this route as well. But if I'm talking about terrestrial plants, then I compete with other applications for valuable resources. I compete for land, I compete for water, I compete for fertilizer. So that there's important societal discussions to have about how much of those scarce resources we want to direct towards the production of liquid fuels. So work to be done, but incredibly optimistic. Let's come back to this business of energy equals prosperity. We showed the growth in prosperity across the course of a couple of centuries in a single place. We can also show this relationship by looking at prosperity across the 200 countries on the planet. So if I plot energy versus prosperity, for those of you who are still paying attention, that's a log-log plot. That's a log-log plot across 3 orders of magnitude in both dimensions. And that's a damn straight line. Energy is prosperity. But here's some more bad news. If energy is prosperity, prosperity induces a set of behaviors that produce more emissions. So what do I mean by that? Well, as I increase in prosperity, the first thing I want is shelter. And so I build shelter out of steel and cement that together are responsible for 15% of emissions. And so in just 3 years, between 2009 and 2011, China used more cement than the United States used in the last century. There's nothing special about China. This will happen to every country as they achieve prosperity. As people acquire wealth, they want mobility. That correlation is so strong that economists use the number of cars in circulation in a population as a measure of the size of middle class. As people acquire wealth, they want calories, and in particular, they want meat that's responsible for 20% of global emissions. As people acquire wealth, they want air conditioning. Air conditioning is about 10% of global electricity today. 90% of homes in the United States have air conditioning. In Mexico and Brazil, that number is 16%. In India, it's 5%. And on and on and on. Look, I don't want to come off here as pessimistic. I'm not pessimistic. I'm incredibly optimistic. I don't know how anybody could walk around this place and look at the technology that's on display, talk to the inventors that are here, talk to the founders and the funders, and not be optimistic, right? You have to be. You can't possibly not be optimistic. But it's important that we have clear eyes and understand the magnitude of the challenge that's in front of us. There's no sugarcoating this. There's no sugarcoating this. And in fact, the scope and scale of the problem sometimes leads people to funny places. So there's a reaction that you'll sometimes see where people will say, oh, it's not hard, it's easy. There's easy ways to do this. And deployment of those easy ways to do this are being frustrated by evil governments or evil corporations or something. It's not true. It's not true. There is no easy button to push here. It's hard work, and it's going to take a long time. But remember, too, that there's another reaction that sometimes comes up, and that is to say, I'm throwing up my hands. The problem is so hard, it's insolvable. And that's wrong, too. It's not insolvable. It'll take time. It'll take work. But look around you at the group of people in this room. If we work together and keep doing what we're doing, we absolutely can solve the greatest challenge of our time, to provide energy and the prosperity that comes with it to the entire planet. Thank you very much.
Breakthrough Energy is a global platform focused on helping the world accelerate to a clean energy future. We're looking for those breakthrough radical ideas that can really make a huge difference in the climate challenge.
These are the guys at the forefront of really the technology frontier, bringing these new clean technologies to life.
We're trying to supply the world with options, new technology solutions to accelerate this energy transition, but ultimately we've got to get the price down to the place where the middle income countries can afford them and adopt them rapidly.
And that is a collective effort. This cannot be expected just from the startups. We need the policymakers around the table. We need the public financial institutions. We need private financial institutions. And we need the large corporations to help accelerate the scaling of these technologies and really use their global value chain to bring them to life.
We've drawn in a bunch of partners that are actively working to turn ambition into action, and this is a great place to do that.
We've got companies that, as they move from the lab to scale out, they can eliminate billions of tons of emissions. These innovative companies are showing how they have new approaches that completely avoid the greenhouse gas emissions. We're finding partners who want to jump in and get these things on the learning curve, and that's where we can get the green premium all the way down to zero.
Imagine a world where we have reliable, affordable, emission-free energy. If you really think about spreading those clean solutions ubiquitously around the world and the massive impact that can have really enabling people to thrive, energy is prosperity. And if you can give those solutions to everybody on the planet, it's mind-blowing to think about what human ingenuity will do and what it'll come up with next.
Please welcome to the stage Mario Draghi, John Podesta, Noel Quinn, and our moderator, Amy Harder.
Everyone, and good morning. It is great to be here today. Thank you all for spending your week with us, and thank you to these gentlemen on stage for the great conversation we are about to have. Please consider sharing your thoughts about this conversation and others throughout the summit on social media using the hashtag BESummit24. We just heard about the immense challenges and opportunities of the energy transition from Dr. Toone and the conversation between Bill and Rodi. To seize upon both simultaneously and as fast as the scientists say we must, we need leadership from governments, the private sector, and more. So I want to dive into our conversation straight away. And Mario, I'm going to come to you first. The home turf, relatively speaking, being on this side of the Atlantic, you're set to release a highly anticipated report on competitiveness and how Europe can remain competitive in a global world. Without getting ahead of that, can you share with this crowd how Europe can remain competitive on clean tech?
Well, the demand for this report started about a year ago. There was no sense that things were going to be so serious. There was a lot of complacency around. But in a sense, the President of the European Commission was very perceptive and asked me to prepare this report. We look at 10 sectors of the European economy, the sectors that have been most impacted by the green and the digital transition. And I think we look at that in a pretty granular way. And then we look at some sort of horizontal, we call them horizontal issues that go across sectors. Namely skills. How do you get the right skills? As you know, the European economy, in a sense, many of the advanced economies have skill shortages. And then innovation, what we just heard from the very inspiring speech of Eric a moment ago. And then we look at trade policies and competition policies and so on. So we look at a series of horizontal issues. And hopefully we will come out with recommendations that will help to address some of our main weaknesses, which are undoubtedly very, very present and significant. But of course, let's never forget that the key challenge Europe has is governance. We look at the other two big blocks, in a sense what we consider our sort of competitors, US and China. And in US, you have now what's called statecraft, namely a good alignment of regulation, taxation, foreign policy, and so on, and finance as well. And China is basically has achieved an almost complete vertical integration of the supply chain from mining to final production. Where does Europe stand in between these two visions? And I'm pretty sure, I'm very confident we'll find our own way. But as I said, our challenge is governance.
Thank you for that, Mario. And I want to dive into that a little bit more in a minute. But John, I want to turn to you and build upon what Mario said. So given your uniquely broad hat, responsible for deploying the Inflation Reduction Act in the States and managing global diplomacy, how do you balance deploying the technologies that we want in the United States without exacerbating trade tensions abroad that Mario was alluding to?
Well, there's more similarity and synergy than you might think, Amy. I think, first of all, you can't be a global leader in the cause of decarbonization and push forward to increase ambition across the globe unless you're doing it at home. And I think what the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act did was to show that the U.S. is committed to really actually meeting the commitment that the president made to cut our emissions by 50 to 52% by 2030. We've seen a huge surge of investment in the clean tech sector in the United States across every one of those sectors that Eric talked about, from power to transportation to agriculture and forestry, buildings, and of course industry. And that gives, I think, the United States credibility at the global stage to say we're both taking care of our own emissions, but we're also setting off a cycle of innovation that's bringing the costs down and that can spread the benefits of that across the globe. So yeah, we get pushed and pulled, but I think what we're attempting to do is inspiring people just to do more, because the scale and scope of the challenge is so great that we all just have to go faster. And I think we have to do it by building and innovating in a context that is going to be country specific, but the end goal has to be taking as much carbon out of the atmosphere as we're putting into it by the mid-century.
Noel, I want to turn to you as sort of our token private sector rep here on stage. We've just heard from two leaders about the role of governments. How does a bank like yours consider global competitiveness, and how can a bank lead on the energy transition while also being responsible with the fiduciary duties that you have as a bank?
Well, let me go back 158 years, and I got out the very first board minutes of HSBC 158 years ago, a few years back. And paragraph 2 and paragraph 3 gave the purpose for the bank being founded, and the purpose was as simple as to help entrepreneurs build their business, and particularly to help them build their business internationally and globally. Now, if you roll forward 158 years in that period of time, and not me personally, I've only done 37 years. It feels like 158 at times. But today's industrial landscape, we've had a role in building today's industrial landscape. And if you accept, which I absolutely do and we do, that there is a climate challenge and we have to act fast, then the sense of purpose for this organization has got to be to help our businesses, the customers we bank, build tomorrow's industrial landscape. That is a lower carbon footprint. So how do I mobilize 200,000 people on that mission, on that purpose? It's got to be client-centric. But to bring it down to practical reality, you help customers today evolve their current business model to make it a lower carbon footprint. But more importantly, you help them and new businesses invest in new technologies and bring new technologies to play, because we cannot reinvent today's industrial landscape by simply a process of evolution. There's going to be an element of revolution in there and innovation. So we've got to both help the transition of today make it better, but create the future of tomorrow through innovation. And that's what we're trying to do. How do we lead? The one thing you cannot do in an institution like this is create a parallel bank. You've got to convert 200,000 people onto that purpose statement and try and equip them with the new skills, the capabilities, the support, the products, the training, so that they can bank the industries of tomorrow, not just keep banking the industries of today or yesterday. So that's our objective. We've quantified it. We said we intend to lend or facilitate the financing of around about 750 billion to $1 trillion of lending on climate-related activity by 2030, and we're on track for that.
I want to ask about the emerging economies. Of course, we heard from Rodi and Bill that ensuring that the whole world benefits from clean energy is so important, because ultimately that's why we're all here, to make sure that the whole world is coming along. But we're also hearing a lot of protectionism, some could argue, from different parts of the world with a lot of these policies. So how can countries in Europe and the United States push an industrial clean economy while also making sure that that industrial clean revolution is going to happen in Southeast Asia and the entire continent of Africa? Mario, I would love to throw that question to you and then maybe bring in the others.
Well, I can give you my own experience and, in a sense, my government experience about that. It was the first government in Italy that had as one of the first objectives was to address the green transition. We had a whole ministry dedicated to this, and there have been many things, I just want to say all this, but one key thing that stays is that we tripled the amount of permits and installations of renewables. The simple simplification of the process for grids and installation permits allowed us to triple the amount, and it stayed. Even last year, again, it's tripled, it stayed. It was not 1 year performance. I think that was one important achievement of simply redirecting the government policy action. At the international level, we had on that year, the G20 meeting that produced unfortunately, the last common commitment to 1.5 degrees Celsius by all countries, including China and Russia. And the commitment to have the net zero by or around mid-century. Since then, unfortunately, things have changed. We had a war. Europe is poorer. Well, I mean, we had 4 quarters of stagnation. We've lost 1% potential growth, so Europe today is poorer. And since electricity prices remain high, we're going to see our potential output going down as well. But it also stressed Europe in a variety of ways. We spent $500 billion simply to shield people from the effect of higher electricity prices on their incomes. And out of emergency, we refocused on fossil fuels. We foresee by 2027, 17 new LNG terminals and 11 new installations in Europe, which is not going in the right direction. But we had to do that since Russia's exports of natural gas stopped. So all this, and of course we've lost the so-called peace dividend. Now we will foresee much higher spending in defense. At the same time, climate change hasn't slowed down. Any serious observer would confirm that. I don't want to discuss this. I think it should be over this. There's no uncertainty about that. And as Bill Gates was saying at the beginning of today, financial conditions are much worse. We had these last 10 years of fantastic progress also because interest rates were much lower. So what are we going to do? And I think he said that. He said it all. He said we should continue to believe in human ingenuity and speed. And we've seen that already. We've seen that basically now green tech represents 40% of Chinese growth in GDP. 40%. And prices for solar collapsed by 75%, For batteries, the same. For storage by 40%, for wind technology by 40%. So we have a way ahead. We got to keep our direction, believing that human ingenuity is not going to lose the battle.
John, I want to turn that question to you. So how does the Biden administration weigh your global leadership on climate while also, acknowledging the increase in fossil fuels somewhere, not just Europe, but also lots parts of the emerging economies around the world are looking to develop natural gas and in some cases oil to fuel their economies. How do you balance that? Which of course, the pause on LNG exports is one acute way that your administration is confronting this issue.
Well, look, I think it was valuable that the United States had the ability to increase its supply and service, particularly the European Union and the needs that Europe had as a result of the illegal invasion of Ukraine by Russia, sanctioning of Russia oil and gas industry, the overdependence that Europe had on Russian fossil fuels was made apparent by that invasion, and the United States was able to step up. But in the end of the day, in Dubai, the world's nations agreed to transition away to fossil fuels. So we're on that transition, and as Mario suggested, we have to intensify and speed that up. And that's going to mean doing the other things that came out of Dubai, like tripling the application of renewables across the globe, doubling efficiency, et cetera. And I think the United States also has an obligation to participate in and find a path forward to provide the financing that's going to be necessary, particularly for least developed economies, to be able to participate, take part, and build the wealth in their economies that are right now energy deprived. So we need to do that and try to do that as much as we can in a clean way, and that's what essentially the international negotiations are about today. But I'll just briefly say, the other thing that we're doing, because you raised the protectionist issue, is we're using a massive amount of US taxpayer dollars in an industrial strategy to do our part to decarbonize our economy and make that transition. And we're not going to permit that to be undermined by a single source of supply, the way Europe found itself dependent on a single source of supply from Russia. We're not going to be dependent on a single source of supply from China, and that's why we're trying to work with our friends and partners and allies, including in Europe and the UK and other places, to make sure that we have a global economy that's all moving in the right direction.
In our final moments together, I want to talk about future leadership. I think a record number of people on this planet are voting this year, and it's raising a lot of questions about the type of ambition we could see in the future. So Noel, I want to start with you on this question. How are you viewing the elections, whether it's the ones that just occurred here in Europe, the one that occurred in India recently, or of course, the one in the US? How does a bank consider the changes in governments in terms of the ambition that you're able to bring to the table?
Well, I'm probably going to not answer the question you've asked me quite as you've asked me, because you talked about leadership earlier. One of our roles is to work with the governments of the world to try and put in place financing structures for many of these technologies to come to scale, and to work public sector policy, public sector finance, and private sector finance on a blended basis. And a lot of people talk about blended finance, but they're not quite sure what they mean by it. Our job as a financial institution is to help governments, companies, marry public sector policy, public sector finance, and private sector equity and debt into structures that work for them so that these new technologies can get to scale. John's done a fantastic job with his colleagues in the US in putting one definition of blended finance there called the Inflation Reduction Act. Other countries are going to have to do it differently. And around the world, we operate in 60 countries, Asia, the Middle East, Europe, the Americas. And they've got to find a definition of blended finance that works for them. A wind and solar plant in the US requires a different financing structure than a wind and solar plant in Africa and in the middle and in parts of Asia. Same technology, same project risk, very different financing structure. And our job is to try and bring blended finance to a definition that's workable for the different countries of the world.
No matter the political leadership. We are out of time, but I would love to hear from Mario and John about your thoughts on the future.
Can I say one last thing? Just reflecting on various conversations we had today, this morning. The future doesn't look as good as it's been in the past. On one hand, both geopolitical conditions and the financial overall situation are not going to be as good as they have been in the last 10 years. That's what looks today. At the same time, we can hope that technology will actually will have a faster pace, even faster pace. But at the same time, I can only stress what Bill said this morning. We should be responsive to the pushback. And we have to structure a response that makes sense, which we have to think seriously about that, which we just started to do that. But it's as important as making progress.
John, speaking of pushback, there is some pushback in the United States, to say the least. Why don't you provide us a concluding comment on leadership in the U.S.?
Well, look, I think that there's no question that we have an upcoming election. Climate's on the ballot. We can look at the respective programs of the former president, the current president. You know that they have very, very different views on this. I think the Inflation Reduction Act is rooted and it does respond to that pushback by having a private sector-led, investment-led strategy that's taking place all across the country, north, south, east, and west, jobs being recreated. Climate Power just put out a new report saying more than 300,000 good-paying jobs, businesses being built all across red and blue states and districts. And so I think the one constant is the one pole in this whole debate is that this private sector-led transformation is working, and and that 10 years of certainty was critical to that. And I think that is the one thing that will remain. Although I'm still optimistic about the outcome of the election, and that we'll be able to stay in the lead on these other issues, including at the international level as well.
Ending on an optimistic note, thank you, gentlemen, for this conversation, and for you in the audience. Lunch is now served in the dining hall, which is immediately below us. Thank you.